You have 30 seconds to tell us why we should give you anything more than pocket change." The words sliced through the air of the lawyer's office as Sharon Lockhart sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. Across the mahogany conference table, her late husband's family watched her with expressions that barely concealed their satisfaction. Judith Lockhart, her mother-in-law, sat with her spine rigid, pearls gleaming against her navy dress. Beside her, Sylvester Lockhart, Andrew's father, leaned back in his leather chair with the confidence of a man who had never been told no in his life. Between them lay a check for $300,000. $300,000 from Andrew's estate, meant to be divided among his parents and siblings. They thought this was their moment of final victory. The moment they could finally rid themselves of the woman they'd never wanted in their family. Sharon's fingers traced the edge of a wrinkled, yellowed envelope the lawyer had just placed in front of her. She could feel their eyes on her, waiting for her to break down, to beg, to finally accept what they'd always believed about her. That she was nothing more than an opportunistic outsider who had trapped their golden son into marriage. But here's what they didn't know, and what you're about to discover in this story. Sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are the ones who hand you the keys to everything they've ever wanted. Hey everyone, I hope you're having a beautiful day wherever you're watching from. Whether you're at home, taking a break at work, or maybe dealing with some difficult weather, I want you to know this story is going to remind you that justice isn't always immediate, but it's often more satisfying when it finally arrives. Some of you might be dealing with people who don't value you right now, who make you feel small or unwanted. This story is for you. This is the story of Sharon Lockhart, a woman who went from being called a gold-digging outsider to walking away with $10 million and her dignity intact. But more than that, it's about how the people who tried to destroy her handed her the very weapon she needed to rise above them all. The woman sitting in that lawyer's office wasn't the same Sharon who had married Andrew Lockhart 8 years earlier. That Sharon had been 22, fresh out of nursing school, and deeply in love with a man who happened to be white and whose family happened to own half the commercial real estate in 3 counties. That Sharon believed that love could conquer anything, that family meant acceptance, and that good people were rewarded for their kindness. She'd been wrong about almost everything. But let me start from the beginning, because the woman Sharon became was forged in fires that would have broken most people. 8 years earlier, Sharon had believed in fairy tales. She believed that when Andrew's mother invited her to Sunday brunch, it was because she wanted to get to know her son's girlfriend. She believed that when his father asked about her family's background, he was making polite conversation. She believed that when his sister commented on how different she was, it was meant as an observation, not a judgment. Sharon had grown up in a working-class neighborhood where her mother was a teacher and her father managed a small grocery store. They'd worked double shifts and saved every penny to send her to nursing school, believing that education and hard work were the paths to a better life. They'd been right about that, but they couldn't have prepared her for what came with loving someone whose family measured worth in property deeds and trust funds. Andrew had been different from his family even then. While they saw Sharon's student loans and second-hand car, he saw her compassion, her intelligence, her dedication to caring for others. While they whispered about her being that kind of girl who was obviously after something, he fell deeper in love with her strength and authenticity. Their wedding had been beautiful and painful in equal measure. Andrew's family attended because appearances mattered to them, but their smiles were practiced and their congratulations hollow. Sharon's family glowed with pride, believing they were witnessing their daughter's dream come true. In many ways, they were right. Sharon was marrying her best friend, her soulmate, the man who saw her true worth. What Sharon didn't know was that Andrew's father had already started making plans to protect what he called the family legacy from what he considered an obvious mistake. The early years of their marriage had been a careful dance. Sharon worked as a pediatric nurse, pouring her heart into caring for sick children, while Andrew built his father's real estate empire into something even bigger. She never asked for money, never demanded access to family accounts, never even hinted that she expected to be included in business discussions. This only made his family more suspicious. When Sharon became pregnant with twins, Judith had actually smiled until she realized Sharon intended to keep working after the babies were born. Real mothers, she'd said during one particularly painful family dinner, focus on their children full-time. They don't need careers when their husbands can provide everything. Sharon had looked across the table at Andrew, who was staring at his plate. That night, they'd had their first real argument about his family's treatment of her. Andrew promised things would change. He promised they'd get better. He'd been wrong too. The twins, Layla and Myra, brought joy that Sharon had never imagined possible. Andrew proved to be an incredible father, present and loving despite his demanding schedule with the family business. For a few years, Sharon let herself believe that maybe his family would finally see her as more than an outsider. The girls had their father's gray eyes and their mother's warm smile, and surely grandchildren would bridge any remaining gaps. Instead, his family found new ways to remind Sharon she didn't belong. They bought the girls expensive gifts that Sharon couldn't afford to match. They planned family vacations to exclusive resorts and country clubs where Sharon's work schedule wouldn't allow her to attend. They spoke about family traditions and the Lockhart legacy while looking pointedly at Sharon, making sure she understood she wasn't part of either. Andrew tried to shield her from the worst of it, but Sharon saw everything. She saw Judith's face when the girls brought home school projects about family heritage. She heard Sylvester's comments about mixed children and confused identities. She felt Andrew's sister Rebecca's cold politeness that somehow hurt worse than outright hostility. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for what happened when Andrew got sick. The diagnosis came on a Wednesday afternoon in March. Sharon had just finished her shift at the hospital when Andrew called. His voice was shaking in a way she'd never heard before. They'd found something during his routine physical. A mass in his pancreas. The doctor wanted him to come in immediately for more tests. The next 72 hours rewrote the entire trajectory of their lives. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The most aggressive kind. Treatment options were limited, and the prognosis was measured in months, not years. Sharon remembered standing in that consultation room, watching Andrew's family receive the news. Judith cried delicately into a monogrammed handkerchief. Sylvester aged 10 years in 10 minutes. His sister Rebecca immediately started asking about experimental treatments and second opinions. Not one of them looked at Sharon. That night, after the girls were asleep and the house was finally quiet, Sharon made a decision that would define the next 6 months of her life. She would fight for Andrew's life with everything she had, and she would do it whether his family helped her or not. What she couldn't have known was that while she was researching treatment centers and rearranging her entire life to become Andrew's caregiver, his family was already discussing what would happen after. She also couldn't have known that Andrew, lying in his hospital bed during those first terrible days, was making plans of his own. If you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about karma and justice. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. But right now, Sharon stood at the beginning of the hardest 6 months of her life, still believing that love and dedication would be enough. Still hoping that crisis might finally bring Andrew's family together. Still trusting that the people who claimed to care about Andrew would support the woman he'd chosen to spend his life with. She was about to learn that some people see tragedy as opportunity, and that the woman she'd have to become to survive what was coming would be stronger than anyone, including herself, ever imagined. The wrinkled envelope sitting on that lawyer's desk was the final chapter of a story that began with a phone call from an oncologist. But Sharon didn't know that yet. All she knew was that the man she loved was dying, and she would move heaven and earth to save him, even if she had to do it alone. The cancer treatment ward at City Memorial Hospital became Sharon's second home within a week of Andrew's diagnosis. She'd taken a leave of absence from her nursing job to become his full-time caregiver. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 in the morning, she'd help him into the passenger seat of their car, drive 40 minutes to the hospital, and sit beside him for 8 hours while chemotherapy dripped into his veins with the desperate hope of buying more time. Andrew's family had opinions about this arrangement. "You're being dramatic, Sharon," Judith had said during one of her brief hospital visits. "Andrew has excellent insurance. He could hire professional nurses. You're not qualified for this level of specialized care." Sharon had looked up from the notebook where she tracked Andrew's symptoms, medication schedules, and doctor's instructions with the precision she'd learned in nursing school. "I'm a registered nurse, Mrs. Lockhart. And I'm his wife. This is what wives do." "Professional wives," Judith had replied, adjusting the diamond bracelet on her wrist. "Know when to step aside for experts." But Andrew had squeezed Sharon's hand and asked her to stay, so she stayed. What Sharon didn't realize was that Judith's suggestion about professional nurses wasn't about Andrew's care at all. It was about control. If Sharon stepped back, if she wasn't there for every doctor's appointment and treatment decision, The family could position themselves as Andrew's primary advocates. They could be the ones making medical decisions, the ones speaking to lawyers about practical matters, the ones managing Andrew's affairs while he was too sick to object. Sharon's constant presence was disrupting plans she didn't even know existed. During those early weeks of treatment, Sharon discovered depths of strength she'd never known she possessed. When Andrew couldn't keep food down, she researched anti-nausea remedies and spent hours making broths he might be able to tolerate. When the steroids made him irritable and confused, she absorbed his frustration without taking it personally. When he cried from pain and fear in the middle of the night, she held him and promised they'd fight this together. The girls, now 7 years old, needed their own kind of care during this crisis. Sharon coordinated playdates and school pickups, helped with homework during hospital waiting periods, and tried to maintain normal routines while their world fell apart. Layla, the more sensitive twin, had nightmares about losing her father. Myra, who resembled Andrew most strongly, became fiercely protective of both her parents. "Mom," Myra had said one evening while Sharon was organizing Andrew's medication for the next day, "why doesn't Dad's family help more?" Sharon had paused, pill bottles in hand. "They're dealing with this in their own way, sweetheart." "By not dealing with it at all," Layla added, looking up from her coloring book. "Grandma Judith only visited once this week, and Aunt Rebecca hasn't come at all." Sharon didn't know how to explain that Andrew's sister was busy consulting with estate attorneys about protecting family assets in case of unfortunate outcomes. She didn't know because no one had told her these conversations were happening. 2 months into treatment, Andrew had what doctors called a modest response. His tumor markers stabilized, and his energy returned enough for him to spend full days at home instead of sleeping constantly. Sharon allowed herself to hope that maybe they were winning this battle. That's when Andrew's family chose to deliver their first real blow. It happened on a Thursday evening in May. Sharon was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Sylvester arrived unannounced. This was unusual. Sylvester never visited without calling first, and he certainly never came alone. "Sharon," he'd said, settling his large frame into one of their kitchen chairs, "we need to discuss some practical matters." Sharon had continued stirring the soup she was making for Andrew. "What kind of practical matters?" "Financial ones. Andrew's medical expenses are substantial, and they're going to get worse before they get better. The family has been discussing ways to help." This should have been good news. Instead, something in Sylvester's tone made Sharon's stomach tighten. "We've decided to establish a medical fund for Andrew's care," Sylvester continued. "We'll cover all his treatment costs, his medications, everything he needs. But we'll need Andrew to sign some paperwork first." Sharon turned to face him. "What kind of paperwork?" "Standard documentation. Power of attorney forms, so we can handle medical bills directly with the hospital. Some asset protection measures to make sure treatment costs don't impact the girls' college funds. You understand?" Sharon didn't understand, but Andrew had appeared in the kitchen doorway before she could ask more questions. He looked tired but alert, wearing the old university sweatshirt that had become his uniform during treatment. "Dad, I didn't know you were coming over." Sylvester stood and embraced his son carefully, mindful of the port in Andrew's chest. "I brought some paperwork for you to review. Financial planning stuff. Nothing urgent, but the accountants want everything organized." Andrew had nodded absently. "Sure, whatever you think is best." Sharon watched this exchange with growing unease. In their 8 years of marriage, Andrew had never deferred financial decisions to his father. He'd built his own successful career within the family business, managed their household investments, and took pride in his financial independence. But cancer had a way of making people want to lean on others, especially family. That night, after Sylvester left and the girls were in bed, Sharon tried to discuss the conversation with Andrew. "What did your father mean about asset protection?" she asked as they got ready for bed. Andrew was already lying down, exhausted by the brief visit. "I don't know, honey. Legal stuff. You know how he worries about everything. But you've always handled our finances. Why does he want power of attorney? It's temporary, just while I'm sick. Makes it easier for them to deal with the hospital billing department." Sharon stared at him in the dim light of their bedroom. Something felt wrong about this entire situation, but she couldn't put her finger on what exactly. Andrew trusted his family completely, and questioning that trust felt like adding stress he didn't need while fighting for his life. So Sharon said nothing. She kissed his forehead and made a mental note to read any paperwork carefully before Andrew signed it. What she didn't know was that the paperwork had already been prepared by the family's attorney, and it did much more than handle hospital billing. She also didn't know that Sylvester had scheduled another meeting for the following week, this time when Sharon wouldn't be home. The next morning brought Andrew's regularly scheduled chemotherapy appointment. As they sat in the treatment center, Sharon noticed Judith approaching their chair cluster. This was only the third time Andrew's mother had come to a treatment session. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Judith asked Andrew, kissing his cheek and offering Sharon only the briefest nod of acknowledgement. "Better this week," Andrew replied. "The new anti-nausea medication is helping." Judith smiled, but her attention shifted quickly to the notebook Sharon kept of Andrew's symptoms and medication schedules. "You're very thorough," she said, though it didn't sound like a compliment. "I want to make sure we don't miss anything important," Sharon replied. "Of course, though I imagine this is overwhelming for you. Managing medical care requires such specialized knowledge." Sharon felt Andrew tense beside her. "Mom, Sharon is a nurse. She knows exactly what she's doing." "Oh, I'm sure she's doing her best," Judith said smoothly. "I just wonder if Andrew might benefit from more experienced support. Professional caregivers who understand complex oncology cases." This was the second time someone in Andrew's family had suggested Sharon wasn't qualified to care for her own husband. Heat rose in her chest, but before she could respond, the nurse called Andrew's name for his treatment. As they walked toward the chemotherapy bay, Andrew whispered, "I'm sorry about that. She doesn't mean anything by it." But Sharon was beginning to think Judith meant exactly what she said. During the 8-hour treatment session, Judith stayed for exactly 45 minutes before announcing she had other commitments. Sharon spent the remaining 7 hours holding Andrew's hand, adjusting his pillows, and watching for any signs of adverse reactions. On the drive home, Andrew seemed more tired than usual. "Sharon," he said quietly, "if something happens to me—" "Nothing's going to happen to you," Sharon interrupted. "But if it does, I need you to know that I've made sure you and the girls will be taken care of. Always." Sharon's throat tightened. "Andrew, don't talk like that. I need to say this. My family, they don't always understand what you mean to me, what you've meant to me since we were 20 years old. But I've made sure they can't change what I want for you and our daughters." Sharon pulled into their driveway and turned to look at her husband. His face was pale from treatment, but his eyes were steady and serious. "What do you mean?" Andrew reached over and took her hand. "I mean that no matter what happens, no matter what anyone says or does, you're my wife and the mother of my children. You're the person I trust most in this world, and I've made sure that trust is protected legally." Sharon squeezed his hand, not understanding why he felt the need to say this, but feeling a chill run down her spine anyway. That evening, while Andrew slept, Sharon found herself standing at their kitchen window, watching Layla and Myra play in the backyard. They were laughing despite everything, still children despite the adult fears they'd been forced to carry. She thought about Judith's comments and Sylvester's mysterious paperwork. She thought about Andrew's words in the car. Most of all, she thought about the growing feeling that while she was focused entirely on saving her husband's life, other people were making plans for what would happen if she failed. Sharon pressed her forehead against the cool glass and made a promise to herself. Whatever was happening behind the scenes, whatever plans were being made without her knowledge, she would protect her family. She would fight for Andrew's life, and if the worst happened, she would fight for their daughter's future. What Sharon couldn't know was that the fight was about to begin much sooner than she imagined, and the enemy wouldn't be cancer. It would be the people who were supposed to love Andrew most. The meeting happened on a Tuesday morning while Sharon was at the hospital with Andrew for his weekly blood work. She'd left the girls at school and planned to spend the day with her husband, but Sylvester had other plans. "Sharon, I need you to come home." Andrew called her cell phone just as they were finishing up at the lab. His voice sounded strange, strained in a way that had nothing to do with his treatment. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Dad's here with some attorneys. They say we need to handle that paperwork we discussed, and they need both of us to sign some documents." Sharon felt that familiar knot in her stomach. "What kind of documents?" "Legal stuff. Trust paperwork. Medical directives. Dad says it's urgent because of some tax deadline." Sharon looked at Andrew, who was pale and tired from the blood draw. "Can't this wait until you're feeling better? They've been waiting for 2 weeks. Dad says this is important for protecting the girl's inheritance. Please just come home so we can get this handled." 20 minutes later, Sharon walked into her own living room to find it transformed into an impromptu law office. Sylvester sat at their dining table with two men in expensive suits and a briefcase full of documents. Andrew was in his recliner, looking overwhelmed and exhausted. Mrs. Lockhart. One of the attorneys stood and extended his hand. I'm Thomas Bradley, the family's estate attorney. Thank you for joining us. Sharon shook his hand, but remained standing. What exactly are we signing? Bradley smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Several important documents to protect your family's financial security during Andrew's treatment. Medical power of attorney forms, trust restructuring paperwork, some asset protection measures. I need to read everything before we sign anything. Of course, Bradley said smoothly. Though I should mention we're operating under some time constraints today. These trust modifications need to be filed before the end of the fiscal quarter, which is next week. Sylvester cleared his throat. Sharon, these are the same attorneys who've handled our family's affairs for 30 years. They're not trying to trick anyone. But Sharon was already moving toward the table, reaching for the stack of documents. What she saw made her head spin. Pages and pages of legal language, multiple signature lines, terms she didn't understand. She flipped through quickly, trying to find something that made sense. This is too much to review in one sitting, she said. I need time to read through everything properly. Bradley exchanged a glance with Sylvester. Mrs. Lockhart, I understand your caution, but perhaps I can explain the key points. The primary document establishes a medical trust fund that will cover all of Andrew's treatment costs. The family is contributing $1 million to ensure he gets the best possible care. Sharon looked up sharply. $1 million? That's right, Sylvester said. We want Andrew to have access to experimental treatments, private specialists, whatever it takes. Money shouldn't be a barrier to saving our son's life. The generosity was overwhelming and suspicious at the same time. That's incredibly generous, Sharon said slowly. But why do you need our signatures for you to set up a trust fund? Because, Bradley explained, to maximize the tax benefits and ensure proper oversight, we're restructuring some of Andrew's existing assets into the medical trust. His current business holdings, some real estate investments, things like that. Sharon felt the room spinning slightly. You want to put Andrew's business into this trust? Temporarily, Sylvester said quickly. Just while he's receiving treatment. It protects those assets from being counted against him if he needs to qualify for any government medical programs. Plus, it allows the family to manage his business interests while he focuses on getting well. Andrew spoke up from his chair. Sharon, they're trying to help us. Dad knows about this stuff better than we do. There's one more component, Bradley continued, that requires both your signatures. Power of attorney documentation that allows the family to make medical decisions if Andrew becomes incapacitated during treatment. Medical decisions. Sharon's voice was sharp. Standard authorization, Sylvester assured her. If Andrew is unconscious during surgery or if the medications affect his judgment, someone needs to be able to speak with doctors and make urgent decisions. Sharon stared at the papers. I'm his wife. I already have that authority. Bradley cleared his throat delicately. Actually, Mrs. Lockhart, spousal authority can be complicated in emergency situations, especially when family members disagree about treatment options. This documentation makes everything clear and legal. The room fell silent. Sharon realized what had just been said. This wasn't about helping Andrew make medical decisions. This was about removing her authority to make medical decisions. Are you saying the family disagrees with my medical decisions? She asked slowly. Sylvester's face flushed. Sharon, you're not a doctor. You mean well, but Andrew needs expert medical management. Expert medical management? Heat rose in Sharon's chest. I'm a registered nurse. I've been to every appointment, every treatment, every consultation. I track his symptoms, his medications, his progress better than anyone. But you're emotionally involved, Bradley interjected. Sometimes family members who aren't as close to the emotional situation can make more objective medical decisions. Sharon felt like she'd been slapped. Family members who aren't as close. I'm his wife. Andrew shifted in his chair. Sharon, please. They're just trying to make sure all the bases are covered legally. It doesn't mean they don't trust you. But Sharon was beginning to understand exactly what this meeting was really about. The $1 million trust fund wasn't generosity. It was bait. What happens if I don't sign? She asked quietly. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, Sylvester spoke. Sharon, this is about saving my son's life. We're offering to cover every possible treatment cost, to give him every possible chance. All we're asking for is some legal organization to make that possible. But what happens if I don't sign? Bradley consulted his notes. The trust fund requires unanimous family consent to be activated. Without your signature, we can't release the funds for Andrew's care. There it was. Sign over control, or watch her husband potentially die because they couldn't afford experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. Sharon looked at Andrew, who was watching her with pleading eyes. She thought about Layla and Myra, who needed their father to survive. She thought about the credit cards they'd already maxed out for treatment costs, the second mortgage they'd taken on their house, the mounting bills from specialists and medications. $1 million could save Andrew's life. All she had to do was trust his family to manage his business and medical care while he recovered. Sharon picked up the pen. She signed the first document, then the second, then the third. By the time she finished signing, her hand was shaking, and she felt like she'd just sold her soul. But Andrew was smiling for the first time in weeks, and Sylvester was already calling the hospital to discuss upgrading Andrew's treatment plan. "You've made the right choice," Bradley said as he gathered the signed documents. "Andrew will have access to the best possible care now." As the attorneys packed up their briefcases and prepared to leave, Sylvester pulled Sharon aside. "I know this feels overwhelming," he said quietly. "But you're not losing anything, Sharon. You're gaining a whole family's support and resources. We want Andrew to beat this just as much as you do." Sharon nodded, but something cold had settled in her chest. The procedure went better than anyone expected. Andrew's surgeon, Dr. Patricia Wells, emerged from the operating room after 6 hours with cautiously optimistic news. They'd been able to access the tumor more successfully than anticipated, and Andrew's vital signs remained strong throughout the procedure. Sharon had spent those 6 hours in the hospital waiting room with Andrew's family, marking the first time they'd all sat together for an extended period. The conversation had been stilted and artificial, but for once, nobody was making pointed comments about Sharon's background or qualifications. The $1 million trust fund had worked exactly as promised. Andrew was moved to a private recovery suite, assigned a team of specialist nurses, and given access to experimental medications that weren't covered by standard insurance. "The pathology results will take a few days," Dr. Wells explained to the family gathered in Andrew's room. "But based on what I observed during the procedure, I'm cautiously optimistic." Andrew, still groggy from anesthesia, squeezed Sharon's hand. "See? I told you we'd beat this thing." For 2 weeks, everything seemed to be improving. Andrew's strength returned gradually, and he was able to spend more time awake and alert. Sharon felt hope for the first time in months. Layla and Myra visited every day after school, and their father was finally able to participate in conversations about their classes, their friends, their plans for summer. But something strange was happening with Andrew's family. Now that they were paying for his care, they acted as though they owned not just his treatment decisions, but him entirely. Judith began arriving at the hospital early each morning before Sharon could get there. Sylvester started attending doctor appointments and taking notes as if he were Andrew's primary caregiver. More concerning were the private conversations Sharon kept walking in on. Hushed discussions between Sylvester and Judith that stopped abruptly when she appeared. Phone calls that ended when she entered Andrew's room. Meetings with attorneys that she wasn't invited to attend. "It's just business stuff," Andrew assured her when she asked about it. "Dad's helping manage some things while I recover." But Sharon had been married to Andrew for 8 years. She knew when he was hiding something, and he was definitely hiding something. The shift came on a Thursday morning in June. Sharon arrived at the hospital to find Dr. Wells waiting for her in the hallway outside Andrew's room. "Mrs. Lockhart, could I speak with you privately?" Sharon's heart immediately started racing. "Is everything okay?" Dr. Wells guided her to a small conference room down the hall. Her expression was grave, and Sharon noticed she seemed unusually nervous. "Sharon, I need to discuss some concerning developments in Andrew's condition." "What kind of developments?" "His latest blood work shows some troubling changes. His white cell count has dropped significantly, and there are some indicators that suggest the cancer may be spreading more aggressively than we anticipated." Sharon felt the room spinning. "But he's been feeling better. He's been stronger." Sometimes patients experience what we call a honeymoon period after surgery. They feel better temporarily, but the underlying disease process continues. Sharon stared at Dr. Wells, trying to process what she was telling her. What does this mean for his treatment? Dr. Wells was quiet for a long moment. It means we need to prepare for the possibility that the cancer is more advanced than we initially believed. The next few weeks will be critical. How critical? I think you should prepare your daughters for the possibility that their father's condition could deteriorate rapidly. The words hit Sharon like a physical blow. After months of fighting, after the successful procedure, after everything they'd been through, Andrew might still be dying. I need to see him, she said, standing abruptly. Of course. But Sharon, I want you to know that Andrew specifically asked me to speak with you first. He wanted you to hear this from me privately before we discuss it with the rest of the family. Something in Dr. Wells's tone made Sharon pause. Why? He said you would handle the news better than his parents would. He was concerned about how they might react. Sharon nodded numbly. Andrew had always protected his parents from difficult realities, even when it cost him emotionally. When Sharon entered Andrew's room, he was sitting up in bed, looking more alert than he had in days. For a moment, she almost convinced herself that Dr. Wells had been wrong about the test results. Hey, beautiful, Andrew said, reaching for her hand. Dr. Wells talked to you? Sharon nodded, not trusting her voice. Come here, Andrew said, pulling her closer. I need to tell you some things while I still can. The next hour was the most important conversation of Sharon's life. Andrew spoke with clarity and urgency about his love for her and the girls, about his regrets and his hopes, about the life they'd built together and the future he wanted for them. Sharon, I've made sure you and the girls will be taken care of no matter what happens. There are things in place that my family doesn't know about. Documents and arrangements that protect you. Andrew, don't talk like this. You're going to get better. Andrew's eyes were steady and serious. Maybe I will. But if I don't, I need you to know that every decision I've made has been about protecting you and our daughters. Every legal document, every financial arrangement, everything. What do you mean? I mean that no matter what anyone tells you after I'm gone, no matter what they claim or what they try to make you believe, you are my wife and the mother of my children. You are the person I trust most in this world. Sharon felt tears streaming down her face. You're scaring me. Andrew squeezed her hand. I'm sorry, but I need you to be strong, Sharon. Stronger than you've ever been. Can you do that for me? Sharon nodded, though she didn't understand why he was asking. That afternoon, while Sharon was picking up the girls from school, Andrew's condition took a sudden turn for the worse. When she returned to the hospital, she found Judith, Sylvester, and Dr. Wells in intense conversation outside Andrew's room. What's happening? Sharon demanded. Dr. Wells's face was pale. Andrew went into cardiac arrest about an hour ago. We were able to revive him, but his condition is extremely critical. Sharon pushed past them into the room. Andrew was unconscious, connected to multiple machines, breathing with the help of a ventilator. He looked smaller somehow, fragile in a way that broke her heart. What happened? He was fine when I left. Sometimes the body just can't fight anymore, Dr. Wells said quietly. The next 24 hours will be crucial. Sharon spent that night holding Andrew's hand, talking to him, begging him to fight. Judith and Sylvester took turns sitting with her, but their presence felt intrusive rather than comforting. They spoke in hushed tones about when this is over and arrangements that need to be made. At 4 a.m. on Friday, the machines started alarming. Dr. Wells and the nursing team rushed in, working frantically to stabilize Andrew's failing heart. Sharon was pushed back against the wall, watching helplessly as they fought to save the man she loved. After 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours, Dr. Wells stepped back from the bed. I'm sorry, she said quietly. He's gone. Sharon heard someone screaming and realized it was her own voice. She collapsed against the wall as Judith and Sylvester moved toward Andrew's bed, crying and embracing each other. But as Sharon sobbed uncontrollably, she noticed something strange. Dr. Wells was watching her with an expression she couldn't interpret. Not just sympathy, but something else. Something that looked almost like apology. Before she could think about it further, Judith was pulling her into an awkward embrace. I'm so sorry for your loss, Sharon, she said, but her voice lacked genuine warmth. Andrew is finally at peace. Sharon stared at her mother-in-law through her tears, struck by the odd phrasing. Finally at peace. As if Andrew's life with Sharon had been a burden he was now free from. The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and funeral arrangements. Sharon felt like she was moving underwater, every action requiring enormous effort. She had to call the girls' school, notify Andrew's business partners, contact their friends and extended family. Through it all, Judith and Sylvester seemed remarkably composed for people who had just lost their son. They efficiently handled logistics, made decisions about memorial services, and discussed next steps with an organization that felt almost businesslike. "Sharon, you shouldn't worry about any of these details," Judith told her. "Let us handle everything. You just focus on the girls." Sharon nodded gratefully, too devastated to question why Andrew's parents were suddenly being so helpful. What she didn't see was the look that passed between Judith and Sylvester when they thought she wasn't watching. A look that suggested Andrew's death wasn't just a tragedy to be endured, but a problem that had finally been solved. Sharon returned home that morning to tell Layla and Myra that their father was gone. The girls' grief was raw and immediate, and Sharon found herself having to be strong for them when she felt completely broken herself. As she held her sobbing daughters, Sharon remembered Andrew's words from their last conversation. "I need you to be strong, Sharon. Stronger than you've ever been." She had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be, or how soon she would need every ounce of that strength to protect her family from the people who were supposed to love them most. The first sign that everything had changed came at Andrew's funeral planning meeting 3 days after his death. Sharon sat in the funeral director's office with Judith and Sylvester, trying to make decisions about the service while still in shock from losing her husband. "For the memorial program," the funeral director said, "we'll need to decide on the family photograph to include." Sharon reached into her purse for the family photo from their last vacation together. Andrew, Sharon, and the twins at the beach, all 4 of them laughing at something Myra had said. It was the last picture they'd taken as a complete family. Judith looked at the photo and frowned. "Actually, I think we should use this one instead." She pulled out a different picture. Andrew with his parents and siblings at some formal family gathering. Sharon wasn't in it. "But this is a family photo," Sharon said quietly, holding up the beach picture. "Yes, it's lovely," Judith said dismissively. "But for the memorial program, we want something that represents Andrew's legacy, his heritage." Sylvester nodded. "The service is really about celebrating Andrew's life and his contributions to the family business and community. This photo better represents that." Sharon stared at them. "His contributions to the family. What about his contributions as a husband and father?" "Of course those are important too," Judith said with artificial sweetness. "But publicly, we want to focus on Andrew's professional achievements and his role in continuing the Lockhart family tradition." The funeral director looked uncomfortable. "Perhaps we could include multiple photos, one representing Mr. Lockhart's family heritage, and one with his immediate family." "That won't be necessary," Sylvester said firmly. "One photo will suffice." Sharon felt something cold settle in her chest. They were erasing her and the girls from Andrew's public memorial, making it seem like his life's work was about carrying on Lockhart family traditions rather than building a life with his wife and children. "I think Andrew would want his daughters represented," Sharon said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The girls will be mentioned in the program," Judith assured her. "But the photo should reflect Andrew's broader legacy." Sharon looked down at the beach picture in her hands. Andrew's arm around her shoulders, both girls making silly faces at the camera. This was his legacy. This was what had mattered most to him. But she was too exhausted from grief to fight about a photograph. The service itself was even worse. Judith had planned every detail without consulting Sharon, creating a memorial that felt like it was for a stranger. Speaker after speaker talked about Andrew's business acumen, his family heritage, his role in community organizations. His marriage and children were mentioned briefly, almost as afterthoughts. Sharon sat in the front row with Layla and Myra, feeling invisible. Friends approached to offer condolences, but they seemed hesitant, as if they weren't sure whether Sharon was important enough to warrant their attention. The Lockhart family commanded the day, receiving sympathy and managing the narrative of Andrew's life. After the service, during the reception at the Lockhart family estate, Sharon overheard a conversation that changed everything. She'd been looking for the girls who had disappeared somewhere in the massive house, when she heard voices coming from Sylvester's study. The door was slightly ajar. "Well, that's finally over," Judith's voice said. "Thank God," replied a voice Sharon recognized as Andrew's sister, Rebecca, who had flown in from Boston. "I thought this day would never end." "The important thing now is to get everything back to normal as quickly as possible," Sylvester said. "The business, the properties, all of it." Sharon paused in the hallway, something in their tone making her listen more carefully. "What about Sharon?" Rebecca asked. Judith laughed, but there was no humor in it. What about her? Andrew's gone. She's not our responsibility anymore. But what about the girls? Rebecca pressed. The girls are Lockhart's, Sylvester said firmly. They'll always be part of this family. But Sharon, he paused. Well, let's just say her role in this family died with Andrew. Sharon's blood turned to ice. Thank goodness, Judith continued. I never understood what Andrew saw in her. All those years of pretending to welcome someone so obviously beneath our standards. At least we don't have to keep up that charade anymore. She actually thought she belonged here, Rebecca said with a laugh. Did you see how she tried to plan the funeral service? As if she understood what Andrew's legacy should look like. The woman works as a nurse, Judith said dismissively. She has no concept of maintaining family dignity or social position. Thank goodness Andrew came to his senses before it was too late. Sharon felt the hallway spinning around her. Came to his senses. Those legal documents he signed right before the procedure, Sylvester said. At least he had the wisdom to protect the family assets and ensure the girls' inheritance would be properly managed. What do you mean? Rebecca asked. I mean, Sharon might be their mother, but she won't be controlling their trust funds or their futures. Andrew made sure of that. Sharon realized she was holding her breath. The papers she'd signed that day. The medical trust, the power of attorney documents, the asset protection measures. They hadn't just been about Andrew's treatment. How much do you think she knows? Rebecca asked. About what? Judith replied. About how little she's actually inheriting. About the real arrangements Andrew made. Sylvester chuckled. She'll find out soon enough. The will reading is next week. I almost feel sorry for her. She probably thinks she's going to inherit the business and the properties. Well, she is getting the house, Judith said. And enough money to live modestly. Andrew wasn't completely heartless. Modestly, Rebecca repeated with amusement. That should be a wake-up call. No more playing dress-up in designer clothes or pretending to belong in our social circle. Sharon's hands were shaking. She wanted to burst into that room and confront them, but her legs felt too weak to move. The best part, Judith continued, is that she'll finally have to get a real job. No more of this nursing nonsense that barely pays anything. Maybe now she'll understand what it's like to actually work for a living instead of living off Andrew's success. Do you think she'll fight it? Rebecca asked. Fight what? The will is ironclad. Andrew's assets go where they're supposed to go, to family. Real family. She can't contest legal documents that were properly witnessed and notarized. Plus, Sylvester added, she signed all those power of attorney forms. She literally gave us permission to manage Andrew's affairs. She can't claim she didn't know what was happening. Sharon felt sick. The documents she'd signed to access the medical trust. They'd been manipulated into signing away Andrew's assets while he was still alive. I still can't believe she was stupid enough to sign everything without reading it properly, Judith said. She was desperate, Sylvester replied. Desperate people make poor decisions. We just gave her what she thought she wanted, money for Andrew's treatment, in exchange for what we actually wanted, which was control. Complete control over Andrew's business, his properties, and his daughter's futures. Sharon can raise the girls, but we'll make sure they understand their real heritage when they're older. Sharon finally found the strength to move. She stumbled backward down the hallway, away from the door, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure someone would hear it. Everything made sense now. The sudden offer to pay for Andrew's treatment. The urgent legal paperwork. The insistence that she signed documents she didn't have time to read properly. It had all been a trap. They'd used her love for Andrew against her. They'd exploited her desperation to save his life, knowing she would sign anything if it meant getting him the best possible care. And now Andrew was dead, and she'd already signed away his entire estate. Sharon found the girls in the library, sitting quietly in a corner, overwhelmed by the day and the crowd of relatives they barely knew. Layla had been crying, and Myra was trying to comfort her sister. Mom, Myra said when she saw her. Can we go home now? This doesn't feel like Dad. Sharon looked at her daughters, her beautiful, intelligent girls who had just lost their father and had no idea that their entire future had been stolen from them by their own grandparents. Yes, she said quietly. Let's go home. As they walked through the Lockhart mansion toward the front door, Sharon felt eyes watching her. Cousins, aunts, uncles, family friends, all of them now looking at her with the knowledge that she no longer belonged in their world. Judith appeared in the foyer as Sharon was gathering the girls' coats. Leaving so soon? She asked with false concern. I thought you might want to stay and visit with family. Sharon met her mother-in-law's eyes directly. We're not family, are we, Judith? Judith's mask slipped for just a moment. Of course you are, dear. Andrew's wife will always be. Andrew's widow, Sharon corrected. That's what I am now, and apparently that changes everything. Judith's smile became strained. I'm not sure what you mean. I think you know exactly what I mean. That night, alone in the house she'd shared with Andrew, Sharon sat at the kitchen table with the copies of the legal documents she'd signed weeks earlier. She read every word, understanding now what she'd been too desperate and trusting to see before. She'd signed over Andrew's business to a family trust managed by his parents. She'd given them power of attorney over his medical and financial decisions. She'd agreed to asset protection measures that removed her from ownership of properties she'd helped Andrew acquire. She'd essentially divorced herself from Andrew's estate while he was still alive, believing she was saving his life. The worst part was the paragraph buried deep in the medical trust documentation. In the event of Andrew's death, all assets held in trust would remain in trust, managed by the family trustees for the benefit of Andrew's children until they reached the age of 35. Sharon would receive what the document called survivor benefits. Enough money to maintain the family home and live modestly, but nothing approaching the wealth she'd helped Andrew build over 8 years of marriage. As Sharon sat reading the documents that had destroyed her future, she realized that Andrew's family had been planning this for months, maybe even years. They'd just been waiting for the right opportunity to execute their plan. Andrew's cancer had given them that opportunity. His death had given them everything they wanted. And Sharon had helped them do it by signing documents she was too desperate to read carefully. She thought about the conversation she'd overheard that afternoon. About how they'd celebrated that pretending to welcome her was finally over. About how they could now get back to normal without having to include someone who was obviously beneath their standards. Sharon put her head down on the table and cried harder than she had since the day Andrew died. Not just for losing her husband, but for losing the naive belief that his family had ever cared about her at all. Tomorrow, she would have to figure out how to tell Layla and Myra that their inheritance had been stolen. She would have to explain why their grandparents, who claimed to love them, had manipulated legal documents to control their futures. She would have to find a way to survive as a widow with 2 7-year-old girls and no financial security in a community where everyone now knew she'd been reduced from Andrew's wife to Andrew's charity case. But tonight, Sharon just sat in the dark kitchen of the house she might not be able to afford much longer, mourning not just her husband's death, but the destruction of everything she believed about family, loyalty, and love. The phone call came exactly 1 week after Andrew's funeral. Sharon was in the kitchen making breakfast for Layla and Myra, trying to establish some semblance of normal routine, when her phone rang. The caller ID showed the name of Andrew's business attorney, not the family's estate lawyer, but the man who had handled Andrew's company legal affairs. Mrs. Lockhart, this is David Chun from Chun and Associates. I'm calling about some urgent business matters that require your immediate attention. Sharon felt her stomach drop. What kind of business matters? There are some discrepancies in the business accounts that need to be resolved quickly. Could you come to my office this morning? And Mrs. Lockhart, you should probably bring any business documents you have at home. 2 hours later, Sharon sat across from David Chen's desk, watching him review a stack of financial records with a deepening frown. Mrs. Lockhart, I'm afraid there's a significant problem. According to these documents, you've been removed as a signatory from all of Andrew's business accounts. What do you mean removed? Chin pulled out copies of the papers Sharon had signed weeks earlier. These power of attorney documents transferred financial control to Andrew's father. But what's concerning is that funds have been moved from business accounts into the family trust at an unusual rate. Sharon's hands went cold. How much money? Over the past 4 weeks, approximately $3 million has been transferred out of Andrew's business operating accounts into accounts controlled by Sylvester Lockhart. Sharon felt the room spinning. But that's Andrew's business. He built that company himself. Actually, according to these documents you signed, the business assets were placed into the medical trust, which means Sylvester now has complete control over the company and its finances. Sharon stared at the papers that had seemed so necessary when Andrew was dying. Can we reverse this? Chen's expression was grim. Mrs. Lockhart, these are legally binding documents. You signed them voluntarily with witnesses present. Reversing them would require proving fraud or duress, which is extremely difficult. Sharon felt like she was drowning. Mr. Chun, I signed those papers to access medical treatment funds for my husband. I had no idea they would transfer his entire business to his father. Did you read the documents before signing? Sharon's silence was answer enough. Mrs. Lockhart, I have to ask. Did anyone explain to you that these documents would remain in effect after Andrew's death? No. Everyone said they were temporary, just while Andrew was receiving treatment. Chin made notes on his legal pad. That's problematic. If the family misrepresented the permanence of these arrangements, that could constitute fraud. But proving that would require what? Evidence that they intentionally deceived you. Documentation of their statements about the temporary nature of the arrangements. Witnesses to conversations where they misrepresented the document's purpose. Sharon felt hope flicker for the first time in days. The doctor was there. Dr. Wells. She heard Sylvester say the papers were just for handling medical expenses. Chin nodded. That's a start, though medical professionals are often reluctant to get involved in family legal disputes. Sharon left the lawyer's office with more questions than answers, but at least she had a plan. She would gather evidence that Andrew's family had deceived her about the legal documents. She would prove they'd exploited her desperation to steal Andrew's estate. But when she returned home, she found Sylvester's car in her driveway. He was sitting at her kitchen table, reviewing a stack of papers. Layla and Myra were nowhere to be seen. Sylvester, what are you doing here? Where are the girls? Sylvester looked up with an expression Sharon had never seen before. Cold, calculating, the mask of grieving father completely gone. The girls are upstairs doing homework. We need to talk. Sharon remained standing. About what? About your conversation with David Chin this morning. Sharon's blood turned to ice. How do you know about that? Sylvester smiled, but it wasn't friendly. Sharon, Chin works for Lockhart Enterprises. Has for 12 years. Any legal issues involving company assets get reported to me immediately. Sharon realized she'd been naive again. Andrew's business lawyer worked for the company, which was now controlled by Sylvester. Of course he would report her inquiries. I see you're starting to understand your situation, Sylvester continued. Good. That will make this conversation easier. Sharon finally sat down, but kept her distance from him. What do you want? I want you to stop making waves. Stop trying to challenge legal documents you signed voluntarily. Stop embarrassing this family with baseless accusations. Baseless accusations? You stole Andrew's business. Sylvester's voice remained calm. I didn't steal anything. You transferred those assets to protect Andrew's medical treatment. Remember? You were so grateful for our help at the time. Sharon felt rage building in her chest. You manipulated me. You knew I would sign anything to save Andrew's life. I knew you would make emotional decisions instead of logical ones. That's not manipulation, Sharon. That's just knowing your character. The cruelty in his tone was breathtaking. Andrew would be horrified by what you've done. Andrew is dead, Sylvester said flatly. And the living have to deal with practical realities. The business needs to be managed by people who understand business. The girls need guidance from people who understand what it means to be Lockharts. You need to accept your new role in this family. Which is what exactly? Sylvester leaned back in his chair. You're the girl's mother. That's important. You'll continue raising them, continue providing emotional support. But financial decisions, educational planning, their future business involvement, those decisions will be made by people qualified to make them. Sharon stared at him. You're talking about my children. I'm talking about Lockharts. There's a difference. Before Sharon could respond, Judith appeared in the kitchen doorway. Sharon hadn't heard her come in. Sharon, dear, Judith said with false sweetness. We've been discussing your situation, and we want to help you through this difficult transition. Transition to what? Judith sat down across from Sharon, adopting a concerned expression. To independence. To building your own life instead of relying on Andrew's success. Sharon felt like she was being surrounded. I wasn't relying on Andrew's success. I helped build it. You were supportive, Judith agreed. But now it's time to develop your own career, your own financial independence. It's actually quite empowering when you think about it. Sylvester pulled out another set of documents. We've researched some excellent nursing positions that would be perfect for your background. Full-time positions with benefits. You could start as early as next month. Sharon looked at the job listings he'd printed out. All of them were in different cities. All of them were several hours away from where Layla and Myra went to school. These jobs are all out of state. Fresh starts are often good after major life changes, Judith said. New environment, new challenges, new independence. Sharon's voice was barely a whisper. You want me to move away from my daughters. We want you to have opportunities to rebuild your life, Sylvester corrected. The girls will be fine. They'll stay here in their home, in their schools, with their family support system. Sharon stood up abruptly. Their family support system. I'm their mother. Of course you are, Judith said soothingly. And you'll always be their mother. But Sharon, be realistic. How are you going to support yourself and two 7-year-old girls on a nurse's salary? How are you going to provide for their private school tuition, their future college expenses, their inheritance planning? Sylvester nodded. The girls need stability during this difficult time. Moving them away from everything they know, forcing them to live in reduced circumstances while you struggle financially, is that really what's best for them? Sharon felt the walls closing in. You planned this. All of it. You planned to take Andrew's business and separate me from my children. We plan to protect this family's future, Judith said firmly. Andrew's daughters deserve better than a life of financial struggle and social decline. Sharon looked back and forth between them. You can't take my children from me. We're not taking them, Sylvester said. We're offering them security and opportunity. You're welcome to visit whenever you want. Holidays, school breaks, special occasions. The girls will know you love them. But they'll live here in their family home, attending their established schools, maintaining their social connections and opportunities. Isn't that what any loving mother would want for her children? Sharon felt like she was suffocating. They were offering her a choice between keeping her children and destroying their future, or giving them up and preserving their inheritance and opportunities. And if I refuse? Sylvester and Judith exchanged a look. Sharon, Judith said carefully, you signed legal documents giving us guardianship authority over the girls' welfare. If we determine that your financial situation isn't stable enough to provide appropriate care, we'd have to fulfill our legal obligation to ensure their well-being. We wouldn't take them legally, Sylvester corrected. We'd fulfill our legal obligation to ensure the girls' well-being. Courts always prioritize children's best interests. Stable home environment, established schools, financial security, versus moving them away from everything they know to live in reduced circumstances with a mother who's struggling to make ends meet. Sharon realized they had her trapped completely. The same legal documents that had transferred Andrew's business had also given them authority over decisions about the girls' welfare. How long do I have to decide? The job applications need to be submitted by the end of the week, Sylvester said. And Sharon, we should mention the house needs to be sold. Sharon's heart stopped. What? The mortgage payments are quite substantial, Judith explained. With Andrew gone, you simply can't afford to maintain this property on a nurse's salary. We've already spoken with a real estate agent. The house should sell quickly in this market. Sharon looked around the kitchen where she'd made breakfast for her family every morning for 8 years. Where Andrew had proposed to her on a snowy Christmas morning. Where Layla and Myra had taken their first steps, said their first words, grown from babies to little girls. Where are we supposed to live? The girls will stay here until the house sells, then move in with us temporarily, Judith said. We have plenty of room, and it won't disrupt their school schedules. And me? You'll find an apartment near your new job, Sylvester said matter-of-factly. Fresh start, new opportunities. Really quite exciting when you think about it. Sharon sat in stunned silence, realizing the full scope of what had been planned. They hadn't just stolen Andrew's business and assets. They'd engineered her complete removal from her children's lives while making it seem like she was choosing to abandon them. I need time to think about this. Of course, Judith said, standing. But Sharon, don't take too long. The girls need stability and certainty during this difficult period. Prolonging uncertainty isn't fair to them. After they left, Sharon sat alone in her kitchen, surrounded by the life she'd built with Andrew. She thought about calling David Chun, but realized now that he worked for the company Sylvester controlled. She thought about calling other lawyers, but had no money to pay for legal representation. She thought about fighting them in court, but realized they had legal documents she'd signed, financial resources she couldn't match, and a story that would make her look like a grieving widow making emotional decisions rather than logical ones. Most of all, she thought about Layla and Myra upstairs doing homework, with no idea that their mother was being forced to choose between keeping them and destroying their futures. That night, as Sharon tucked her daughters into bed, Myra asked the question she'd been dreading. Mom, are we going to be okay? I mean financially. Sharon looked into her daughter's eyes, Andrew's eyes, and realized she couldn't tell her the truth. That their father's family had stolen their inheritance. That she was being forced to choose between staying with them and providing for them. That everything they'd believed about family and love and security had been destroyed by the people who claimed to care about them most. "We're going to be fine," she lied. "Everything's going to work out." But as Sharon lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of the room she'd shared with Andrew, she knew that nothing was going to be fine. She was about to lose everything, her home, her financial security, and possibly her children, to people who had spent 8 years pretending to tolerate her while planning her destruction. The worst part was that they were doing it all legally, using documents she'd signed out of love for her husband. Andrew had promised her that he'd made sure she and the girls would be taken care of. But Andrew was gone, and his family had made sure his promises meant nothing. Sharon had 3 days to give Sylvester and Judith her decision about the job applications, when something unexpected happened. She was cleaning out Andrew's home office, boxing up his papers and personal items before the house went on the market, when she found something that changed everything. Hidden in the back of Andrew's desk drawer, taped underneath, was a small brass key. Sharon had been through Andrew's office dozens of times during his illness, organizing bills and managing correspondence. She'd never noticed this key before, and she couldn't imagine what it opened. Andrew had always been organized to the point of obsession. Every key in their house was labeled and stored in a specific location. This key had no label. On impulse, Sharon began searching the office for anything that might require a small brass key. She checked Andrew's filing cabinets, his desk drawers, even the small safe where they kept important documents. Nothing. Then she remembered the storage unit. Andrew had rented a small storage facility unit about 18 months ago, claiming he needed space for business files and old furniture. Sharon had never been there, had never seen what he stored there. She'd assumed it was exactly what he'd said, overflow business storage. But what if it wasn't? Sharon found the storage facility address in Andrew's address book and drove there that afternoon while the girls were at school. The facility was across town in a quiet industrial area. She'd never had reason to visit. Unit 142 was in the back corner of the facility. Sharon's hands shook as she inserted the key into the lock. Part of her expected it not to work, expected this to be another dead end in her increasingly desperate situation. The key turned smoothly. Inside the storage unit, Sharon found something that took her breath away. The space was organized like a second office. There was a desk, a filing cabinet, and boxes full of documents. But these weren't business files or old furniture. These were legal documents, financial records, and correspondence. All of it related to Sharon and the girls. On the desk was a wrinkled envelope addressed to Sharon in Andrew's handwriting. Her name was written in his careful script, and underneath he'd written, "To be opened only in case of my death." Sharon's hands were shaking so badly she could barely tear open the envelope. "My dearest Sharon, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and my family has shown their true nature. I pray that I'm wrong about what I suspect they're planning, but I've learned enough about their intentions to know I need to protect you and our daughters. Everything in this storage unit is yours. The documents in the filing cabinet prove that my family has been planning to challenge our marriage and your inheritance rights for over 18 months. I've been gathering evidence of their conversations, their meetings with attorneys, their financial manipulations. The documents they convinced you to sign were not what they claimed. I know because I never sign matching documents. The papers I actually signed are in the blue folder. They protect you and the girls completely, regardless of what my family believes they've accomplished. Sharon, I've made arrangements that they know nothing about. Accounts they can't access, properties they can't touch, legal protections they can't override. You and our daughters are going to be more than fine. You're going to be secure beyond anything my family can imagine. But first, you need to let them think they've won. Let them proceed with their plans. Let them show everyone exactly who they really are. Then, when the time is right, you'll have everything you need to protect our family and expose theirs. Look in the red folder for instructions. Follow them exactly, and trust that I've thought of everything. I love you more than life itself. Take care of our girls, and take care of yourself. This is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of your independence. Forever yours, Andrew." Sharon's tears fell onto the letter as she finished reading. Andrew had known. Somehow he'd known what his family was planning, and he'd prepared for it. She wiped her eyes and opened the red folder. Inside was a detailed set of instructions in Andrew's handwriting, along with copies of legal documents she'd never seen before. Real estate deeds, bank account information, stock certificates, business incorporation papers. All of it in her name or in trust for the girls. The instructions were clear. Let his family proceed with the will reading. Let them distribute what they believe is his entire estate. Don't reveal the existence of these documents until after they've shown their true nature publicly. Sharon spent the next 2 hours reading through everything in the storage unit. What she discovered was staggering. Andrew had been quietly moving assets into accounts and properties that his family couldn't access for over 2 years. Not just thousands of dollars, but millions. Real estate holdings they didn't know about. Business investments registered in Sharon's name. Trust funds for the girls that were completely separate from anything his family controlled. More importantly, he documented everything his family had said and done. Recorded conversations about their plans to get rid of Sharon. Email exchanges about challenging their marriage legally. Meeting notes from attorneys discussing how to minimize Sharon's inheritance rights. Andrew had been 3 steps ahead of them the entire time. But the most shocking document was at the bottom of the blue folder. A copy of Andrew's real will, dated just 1 month before his death, leaving everything to Sharon and the girls with ironclad legal language that his family couldn't challenge. The will his family planned to read next week was a fake. Sharon sat in the storage unit for another hour, absorbing the magnitude of what Andrew had done. He'd known his family would try to destroy her after his death, and he'd spent years preparing to protect her from them. But he'd also set a trap for them. If she followed his instructions exactly, his family would publicly reveal their cruelty and greed, believing they were finally free from the woman they'd never wanted in their family. And then she would reveal that they had no power over her or the girls at all. Sharon drove home with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since Andrew's death. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe properly. That evening, when Sylvester called to ask about her decision regarding the job applications, Sharon gave him the answer he wanted to hear. "I've decided to take the position in Philadelphia," she said. "You're right that the girls need stability, and I can't provide that right now." Sylvester's relief was audible. "Sharon, I think you're making the right choice for everyone. The girls will understand that you're doing this out of love for them. When do you want me to leave?" "Well, the will reading is scheduled for Monday. After that, we can help you transition smoothly. The girls can stay with us temporarily while you get settled in Philadelphia." Sharon smiled, though Sylvester couldn't see it. "That sounds perfect." After she hung up, Sharon sat down with Layla and Myra to have the hardest conversation of her life. "Girls, I need to tell you about some changes that are coming." For the next hour, Sharon explained that she would be moving to Philadelphia for a new job, that they would stay with their grandparents temporarily, and that this arrangement was what seemed best for everyone during this difficult time. Layla cried. Myra got angry. Both girls accused her of abandoning them when they needed her most. Sharon let them express their anger and hurt, knowing that she couldn't tell them the truth yet. She couldn't explain that their grandparents had engineered this separation, or that she was playing along to expose them. She couldn't tell them about the storage unit or their father's real plans. All she could do was hold them and promise that everything would work out, that she loved them more than anything, and that this situation was temporary. "Mom," Myra said finally, "Dad would hate this. He would hate us being separated from you." Sharon's voice was steady when she replied, "Your father loved you both more than anything in the world. Everything he did was to protect our family. Trust that even when things don't make sense." That night, Sharon lay in bed thinking about the choice Andrew had given her. She could reveal his documents immediately, keep her family together, and let his relatives disappear quietly with their reputations intact. Or she could follow his plan, endure temporary separation from her daughters, and let his family expose themselves completely before revealing that they had no power over her at all. Sharon thought about 8 years of condescension, cruelty, and barely concealed racism. She thought about how they'd exploited her grief and desperation to steal what they believed was her husband's estate. She thought about how they'd planned to separate her from her children, while making it seem like her choice. She thought about Judith's comment that she was finally free from having to pretend to welcome someone obviously beneath their standards. By morning, Sharon had made her decision. She was going to follow Andrew's plan exactly. She was going to let his family think they'd won completely. And then, when they were celebrating their victory publicly, she was going to destroy them with the truth. Sharon Lockhart was done being underestimated. It was time to show Andrew's family what happened when they tried to destroy someone who had been preparing for war while they thought they were planning a simple eviction. The will reading was scheduled for Monday morning at 10 o'clock in the offices of Bradley and Associates, the same law firm that had handled the documents Sharon had signed during Andrew's illness. Sharon arrived 5 minutes early, wearing a simple black dress she'd bought years ago for work functions. She'd deliberately chosen something modest, something that would reinforce the family's perception of her as financially struggling. The waiting room was already full when she walked in. Judith and Sylvester sat together on the leather sofa, both dressed in expensive dark suits that somehow managed to convey grief and authority simultaneously. Andrew's siblings, Rebecca from Boston and his brother Marcus from Seattle, flanked them in matching chairs. Several cousins, aunts, and uncles filled the remaining seats. Everyone looked appropriately somber, but Sharon caught the undercurrent of anticipation in their conversations. This was the moment they'd been waiting for, the final confirmation that Sharon would be relegated to her proper place in their family hierarchy. "Sharon, dear," Judith said as Sharon took the only remaining chair, positioned slightly apart from the family cluster. "You look tired. The stress of everything must be overwhelming." "I'm managing," Sharon replied quietly. Rebecca leaned forward with artificial concern. "Have you had any luck with those job applications Sylvester mentioned? Philadelphia could be a wonderful fresh start for you." Sharon nodded. "I have some promising leads." The family exchanged satisfied glances. Sharon was playing her expected role perfectly, the grieving widow accepting her reduced circumstances gracefully. At exactly 10 o'clock, Thomas Bradley appeared in the waiting room doorway. Sharon had met him before during the signing of those documents that had changed everything. Today, he looked uncomfortable in a way that seemed unusual for someone who handled family legal matters regularly. "Thank you all for coming," Bradley said. "If you'll follow me to the conference room, we can begin." The conference room was dominated by a long mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs. Bradley took his place at the head of the table with Sharon and Andrew's family arranged around the sides. Bradley's assistant sat in the corner with a recording device and notepad. "Before we begin," Bradley said, "I want to express the firm's condolences on Andrew's passing. He was a valued client and a good man." Murmurs of agreement circled the table. Bradley opened a thick folder and pulled out several documents. Andrew's will is relatively straightforward, though there are a few specific bequests that require explanation. Sharon noticed that Bradley kept glancing at her with an expression she couldn't interpret. Not sympathy exactly, but something that looked almost like apology. "The first bequest is to Andrew's parents, siblings, and extended family," Bradley continued. "Andrew has left the sum of $300,000 to be divided equally among all family members present today." A collective sigh of satisfaction went around the table. Sharon watched faces light up as people did quick mental calculations about their individual shares. "That's very generous," Judith said, though her tone suggested she'd expected more. "Andrew always took care of family," Sylvester added, nodding approvingly. Bradley continued reading. "The next bequest is for Sharon Lockhart, Andrew's wife. Andrew has left Sharon their family home, free and clear of any mortgage obligations, along with the sum of $75,000 to assist with immediate expenses." Sharon heard several small gasps around the table. Not gasps of surprise, but gasps of relief. This was exactly what they'd expected, enough for Sharon to live modestly, but nothing that would allow her to maintain the lifestyle she'd enjoyed as Andrew's wife. $75,000, Rebecca repeated slowly. "That's practical." "Very practical," Judith agreed. "Enough to provide security without creating dependency." Sharon noticed the careful phrasing. They were talking about her as if she weren't sitting right there, discussing the appropriateness of her inheritance like she was a charity case rather than Andrew's wife of 8 years. "The final major bequest," Bradley continued, "concerns Andrew's business interests, investment portfolio, and remaining liquid assets. These are to be held in trust for Layla and Myra Lockhart until they reach the age of 35, with management oversight provided by the family trustees designated in the previous legal documents." Sharon felt the family's triumph ripple around the table. Everything had gone exactly according to their plan. They would control the girl's inheritance, manage Andrew's business empire, and Sharon would be left with just enough money to live quietly without embarrassing anyone. Marcus leaned back in his chair with obvious satisfaction. Andrew showed real wisdom in these arrangements. The girl's future is secure, and everyone knows their role going forward. Bradley looked uncomfortable. Actually, there is one more item. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a wrinkled, yellowed envelope. Sharon's breath caught in her throat. This was exactly what Andrew had prepared her for. Andrew left specific instructions that this envelope be given to Sharon Lockhart after the reading of his formal will. He was very particular that it not be opened until this moment. Bradley placed the envelope in front of Sharon. Her name was written on it in Andrew's careful handwriting, and it looked like it had been sealed for a long time. Judith looked at the envelope dismissively. What could that possibly be? Probably some sentimental letter or photos. Rebecca laughed. Andrew always was romantic. Probably his final love letter to Sharon. How sweet, Marcus said with barely concealed mockery. A memento to go with her 75,000. Sharon looked around the table at the faces of people who had spent 8 years tolerating her presence in their family. They were practically glowing with satisfaction, believing they had finally succeeded in reducing her to exactly what they'd always considered her to be, an insignificant outsider with no real claim to Andrew's legacy. Well, go ahead and open it, dear, Judith said with artificial kindness. I'm sure we'd all love to hear Andrew's final words to you. Sharon's hands were steady as she broke the seal. Inside the envelope were 3 items: a handwritten letter from Andrew, a certified check, and a thick stack of legal documents. Sharon unfolded the letter first, though she'd already read it in the storage unit. She began reading aloud, her voice clear and strong. My dearest Sharon, if you are reading this in front of my family, it means they have revealed exactly who they truly are. The smug expressions around the table began to falter slightly. Sharon continued reading. You have endured 8 years of their condescension, their racism, their attempts to make you feel unworthy of being my wife. You have been the most loving wife and mother I could have imagined, and they have never appreciated your strength, your intelligence, or your incredible heart. Judith shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Sharon, perhaps this is too personal to share with everyone. Sharon looked up from the letter. Actually, Judith, Andrew specifically requested that I read this aloud in front of all of you. She continued reading. Sharon, I have been documenting my family's behavior and their plans for months. I know they manipulated you into signing documents under false pretenses. I know they have been planning to separate you from our daughters and steal the wealth we built together. I know they believe they have succeeded. The room had gone completely quiet. They are wrong. Sharon folded the letter and picked up the certified check. She looked at the amount, though she already knew what it would say, and felt a smile spread across her face. This check, Sharon said, holding it up so everyone could see, is made out to me in the amount of $10 million. Rebecca's face went white. That's impossible. Sharon set down the check and picked up the legal documents. These documents transfer ownership of Lockhart Enterprises, all real estate holdings, investment portfolios, and liquid assets to me and my daughters. The properties you thought you controlled, the business you thought you inherited, the trust funds you thought you managed, all of it belongs to me. Sylvester stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. We have legal documents. Sharon signed power of attorney forms, asset transfer agreements. We have witnessed, notarized documents. Sharon smiled. Yes, you do. Documents that transferred control of assets that Andrew no longer owned, because 2 years ago he began moving everything into accounts and corporations that you knew nothing about. Every signature you witnessed, every document you had notarized, transferred control of empty accounts and meaningless corporate shells. Bradley cleared his throat. I can confirm that these documents are legitimate and properly executed. Mrs. Lockhart is now the sole owner of what was previously Andrew's estate, which is considerably larger than the $300,000 bequest to the extended family. Judith's voice was barely a whisper. How much larger? Sharon stood up, looking down at the people who had spent the morning congratulating themselves on their successful manipulation of a grieving widow. The total value of Andrew's actual estate is approximately $43 million. The $10 million check represents liquid assets. The rest is in real estate, business holdings, and investments. All of it now belongs to me and my daughters. The silence in the room was deafening. Sharon continued, her voice growing stronger. For 8 years, you have treated me like an unwelcome guest in my own family. You have questioned my love for my husband, my qualifications as a mother, my right to be part of your social circle. You have made racist comments about my background, dismissive remarks about my career, and cruel jokes about my worthiness. Rebecca tried to interrupt. Sharon, that's not fair. We always what, Rebecca? Always welcomed me? Always treated me with respect? Always made me feel like I belonged. Sharon picked up Andrew's letter again. Andrew wrote something else here that I think you need to hear. My family has shown me that their love is conditional and their acceptance is based on social status rather than character. Sharon has shown me that real love is unconditional and real family is based on choice rather than obligation. Sylvester was still standing, his face red with anger and shock. This is insane. Andrew wouldn't have done this. He wouldn't have betrayed his own family. Sharon looked at him steadily. Andrew didn't betray his family, Sylvester. His family betrayed him. The moment you started planning to steal his wife's inheritance and separate her from her children, you stopped being his family and started being his enemies. She gathered up the documents and the check. Bradley, I assume you have copies of everything for your files? Yes, Mrs. Lockhart. Everything is properly documented and legally binding. Sharon walked toward the door, then turned back to face Andrew's family one last time. Oh, and about those job applications in Philadelphia? I won't be needing them. I'll be staying right here in our family home with my daughters, managing my husband's business empire, and making sure Layla and Myra understand the difference between real family and people who share your DNA. Judith found her voice. Sharon, please. We can work this out. We're still family. Sharon paused at the doorway. No, Judith, we're not family. Family doesn't try to steal from each other. Family doesn't try to separate mothers from their children. Family doesn't spend 8 years pretending to love someone while planning their destruction. She smiled, and for the first time since Andrew's death, it was a genuine smile. Enjoy splitting that $300,000 among all of you. I believe that works out to about $20,000 each. I hope it was worth destroying your relationship with your granddaughters for such a small amount of money. Sharon walked out of the conference room, leaving Andrew's family sitting in stunned silence around a table where they'd expected to celebrate their final victory over the woman they'd never wanted in their lives. Instead, they'd just discovered that the woman they'd underestimated for 8 years now controlled everything they'd spent their lives trying to protect from her. Sharon sat in her car outside Bradley's law office for 20 minutes after the will reading, her hands shaking as the full magnitude of what had just happened settled over her. She wasn't just financially secure. She was wealthy beyond anything she'd ever imagined. More importantly, she had the power to protect her daughters from the people who had tried to steal their future. But underneath the triumph was a hollow ache that no amount of money could fill. Andrew was still gone. She'd won the war he'd prepared her to fight, but she'd won it alone. Sharon drove home slowly, thinking about how to tell Layla and Myra what had happened. They were at school, unaware that their entire world had just shifted again. As Sharon pulled into her driveway, she noticed a car she didn't recognize parked across the street, a sedan with tinted windows that looked official somehow. Her first thought was that Sylvester and Judith had called lawyers already, that they were preparing to challenge what had happened at the will reading. Sharon was gathering her purse and the legal documents when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Wells's office. Mrs. Lockhart, this is Dr. Patricia Wells. I was wondering if you could come to my office this afternoon. There's something important I need to discuss with you. Sharon felt her stomach drop. Is everything okay? Is this about Andrew's medical records? Dr. Wells paused. Mrs. Lockhart, it's better if we discuss this in person. Could you come in around 3 o'clock? Sharon agreed, though she couldn't imagine what Andrew's doctor would need to discuss with her weeks after his death. Maybe there were final medical bills or forms that needed to be signed for insurance purposes. She spent the next 2 hours at home trying to process everything that had happened. The house felt different now that she knew she could keep it, that it truly belonged to her and the girls. She walked through rooms where she'd felt like a guest for so many years, realizing that she was finally completely free to make this place their own. At 2:45, Sharon drove to Dr. Wells's office. The medical building felt strange and sad. She'd spent so many hours here during Andrew's treatment, and returning brought back memories of hope and fear and the desperate fight to save the man she loved. Dr. Wells's receptionist led Sharon directly to her private office, which was unusual. Normally patients waited in the examination rooms. Mrs. Lockhart, thank you for coming, Dr. Wells said as Sharon sat down across from her desk. I know this has been an incredibly difficult time for you. Sharon nodded. The will reading was this morning. It was complicated. Dr. Wells studied her face carefully. How are you feeling? Overwhelmed. Angry. Relieved. I'm not sure yet. Sharon paused. Dr. Wells, what did you need to discuss? Is there a problem with Andrew's medical records? Dr. Wells was quiet for a long moment, and Sharon noticed that she seemed nervous in a way that was completely unlike her usual calm professionalism. Mrs. Lockhart, what I'm about to tell you is going to be shocking. I need you to prepare yourself for information that will change everything you believe about the past few weeks. Sharon felt ice forming in her chest. What kind of information? Dr. Wells stood up and walked to her office door. She looked out into the hallway, then closed the door and locked it. Sharon, Andrew isn't dead. The words hit Sharon like a physical blow. She stared at Dr. Wells, certain she'd misheard her. What did you say? Andrew is alive. His death was staged. Carefully planned and expertly executed, but staged. Sharon's vision started to blur around the edges. That's impossible. I was there. I saw him die. I saw the machines, the flatline, everything. Dr. Wells moved back to her desk but remained standing. You saw exactly what we wanted you to see. Sharon, Andrew came to me 3 months before his death with a plan. He had discovered the full extent of his family's intentions. Not just to steal his assets, but to have you declared an unfit mother and gain full custody of Layla and Myra. Sharon felt like the room was spinning. You're saying Andrew faked his own death? I'm saying Andrew chose to disappear temporarily to protect his family from people who were planning to destroy them. Sharon, his family had been consulting with attorneys about challenging your marriage, claiming you manipulated a sick man into signing over his assets. They had planned to have you committed for psychiatric evaluation, claiming that grief had made you unstable. Sharon stared at Dr. Wells, trying to process what she was telling her. But why? Why would they go that far? Because they never accepted that Andrew chose you over their approval. They spent 8 years waiting for him to come to his senses and leave you. When it became clear that would never happen, they decided to remove you from the equation permanently. Dr. Wells sat down again, her expression serious. Andrew discovered their plans when he overheard a conference call between his father and their family attorney. They were discussing how to have you declared mentally incompetent so they could gain guardianship of the girls and control of what they believed was Andrew's estate. Sharon felt sick. They were going to have me committed. They had already consulted with a psychiatric facility. They had a plan to claim that your obsessive caregiving during Andrew's illness was evidence of psychological instability. They were going to say that your inability to accept help from the family showed that you weren't capable of making rational decisions about the girls' welfare. Sharon put her head in her hands. So Andrew decided to die instead. Andrew decided to give them enough rope to hang themselves. He knew that if he disappeared, they would reveal their true nature completely. They would show their cruelty, their greed, their racism, everything they'd been hiding behind polite facades for 8 years. Dr. Wells pulled out a thick folder from her desk drawer. He also knew that the only way to protect you and the girls permanently was to transfer his assets in a way that his family couldn't challenge or reverse. So he spent months moving everything into accounts and legal structures that would be completely secure. Sharon looked up. The storage unit. The documents. He planned all of it. He planned everything. Every conversation with attorneys, every financial transfer, every legal document. He even planned the timing of his death to coincide with specific legal deadlines that would make his family's documents meaningless. Sharon felt tears starting. Where is he? Dr. Wells smiled for the first time since Sharon had arrived. He's been staying at a private medical facility about an hour from here. Officially, he's been receiving treatment for his condition under an assumed name. Unofficially, he's been monitoring everything that's happened over the past few weeks. He knows about today, about the will reading. He knows everything. He's been watching his family destroy themselves exactly as he predicted they would. And he's been waiting for the right moment to return. Sharon's voice was barely a whisper. When? Dr. Wells looked at her watch. Actually, he should be arriving here any minute. I called him after you confirmed the will reading was complete this morning. Before Sharon could respond, there was a soft knock on Dr. Wells's office door. Sharon's heart stopped. Dr. Wells walked to the door and opened it slowly. Andrew stepped into the office. Sharon couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. She couldn't process what she was seeing. The man she'd grieved for, the husband she'd buried, the father her children believed they'd lost forever, was standing in front of her, alive and healthy and real. Hello, beautiful, Andrew said softly. Sharon stood up so quickly her chair fell backward. She stared at Andrew, afraid that if she blinked, he would disappear again. You're alive, she whispered. I'm alive. Sharon crossed the room in 2 steps and threw herself into Andrew's arms. He caught her and held her tightly, and she could feel his heartbeat against her chest, could smell his cologne, could feel the warmth of his skin. You're real, she sobbed into his shoulder. You're actually real. Andrew held her while she cried, stroking her hair and whispering apologies and promises and declarations of love. Dr. Wells quietly left her office, giving them privacy for their reunion. I'm so sorry, Andrew said when Sharon finally pulled back to look at his face. I'm so sorry I put you through this. I'm sorry you had to grieve for me. I'm sorry you had to fight my family alone. Sharon was touching his face, his hands, his chest, still unable to believe he was really there. But why? Why did you have to die? Why couldn't we have fought them together? Andrew guided her to the couch in Dr. Wells's office, keeping her hands in his. Because they had to show everyone who they really were. Sharon, they weren't just planning to steal money. They were planning to destroy you completely. They had doctors prepared to testify that you were mentally unstable. They had witnesses prepared to say you'd been neglecting the girls. They had a custody arrangement already drafted that would have given them permanent guardianship. Sharon felt sick again. They would have taken Layla and Myra. They would have taken everything. Your children, your home, your freedom, your reputation. They would have left you with nothing and made it look like it was for your own good. Andrew squeezed her hands. The only way to stop them was to give them what they thought they wanted, my death and control of my estate. I had to let them think they'd won so they would show their true nature publicly. And I had to make sure you had evidence of their cruelty that no court could ignore. Sharon stared at him. You planned for me to record them? Andrew smiled. I planned for you to be stronger than they ever imagined you could be. I planned for you to fight back in ways that would expose them completely. I planned for you to win, not just financially, but morally. The storage unit, the documents, you knew I would find them. I knew you would find them when you were ready to use them. Sharon, I've been watching you for the past few weeks, and I have never been more proud of anyone in my life. You handled my family with grace and intelligence and strength that amazed me. Sharon felt anger mixing with her relief. You've been watching me? You've been alive this whole time, and you let me think you were dead. Andrew's expression became serious. Sharon, if I had revealed myself too early, if my family had known I was alive, they would have changed their strategy. They would have been more careful, more subtle. They might have succeeded in taking the girls. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small recording device. Every conversation they had with you was recorded. Every cruel comment, every manipulation, every threat. We have evidence of everything they did. Sharon stared at the device. You recorded them trying to destroy me. I recorded them destroying themselves. Sharon, no court in the world would give custody of our children to people who treated their mother the way they treated you. No business partner would trust people who manipulated legal documents the way they did. No social organization would welcome people who showed such cruelty to a grieving widow. Sharon was quiet for a long moment, processing everything Andrew had told her. What happens now? Andrew stood up and pulled her to her feet. Now we go home. We tell our daughters that their father is alive and that their family is finally safe. We start the life we should have had all along, free from people who never deserved to be part of it. Sharon felt tears starting again. The girls. Oh God, Andrew. The girls think you're dead. Layla has been having nightmares. Myra has been trying to take care of everyone. They've been so broken. Andrew's eyes filled with tears. I know. Dr. Wells has been monitoring their psychological health through their school counselor. I know how much pain they've been in, and I know it's my fault. How do we tell them? How do we explain this? Andrew took her hands again. We tell them the truth. We tell them that sometimes adults have to make impossible choices to protect the people they love. We tell them that their father would do anything, including disappear temporarily, to make sure they were safe. Sharon nodded, though she was still processing the magnitude of what had happened. Your family. What happens to them? Andrew's expression hardened. They're finished. Sharon, they're not just losing money. They're losing everything. Their reputations, their social standing, their business relationships, all of it. What do you mean? Andrew pulled out his phone and showed Sharon a text message. I sent recordings of their conversations to every major business contact, every social organization they belong to, every charity board they serve on. By tomorrow morning, everyone in their social circle will know exactly what kind of people they really are. Sharon stared at the phone. You're destroying them. They destroyed themselves. I'm just making sure everyone knows what they did. Andrew put his phone away and took Sharon's face in his hands. Sharon, I need you to understand something. What my family did to you over the past few weeks, the cruelty, the manipulation, the attempts to separate you from our children, that's who they really are. For 8 years, they hid their true nature because they had to. Now everyone gets to see them without their masks. Sharon leaned into his touch. I can't believe you're really here. I'm here. I'm alive. I'm never leaving you again. They left Dr. Wells's office together, Andrew's arm around Sharon's waist as they walked to her car. The sedan across the street that Sharon had noticed earlier was gone. Sharon realized now that it had probably been Andrew's security watching to make sure she was safe. There's something else, Andrew said as they reached Sharon's car. Something I need to show you before we go home. He led her to a black SUV parked at the far end of the medical building's parking lot. When they approached, the back door opened and Layla and Myra climbed out. Sharon gasped. Girls, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be at school. Myra looked at her mother with tears in her eyes. Mom, Dr. Wells called the school. She said we needed to come here for an emergency. Layla was staring at something behind Sharon, her face white with shock. Sharon turned and saw Andrew standing there, watching his daughters with an expression of desperate love and hope. Dad, Layla whispered. Hello, sweetheart. What happened next was chaos. Both girls launched themselves at Andrew simultaneously, crying and shouting, and trying to touch him to make sure he was real. Andrew knelt down and wrapped both arms around them, holding them tightly while they sobbed. You're alive, Myra kept repeating. You're alive. You're alive. You're alive. I'm alive, Andrew confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry, girls. I'm so sorry you thought I was gone. Layla pulled back to look at her father's face. But we saw you die. We were at the hospital. The machine stopped working. Andrew looked at both his daughters seriously. I need to explain something to you both, and it's going to be hard to understand. I had to pretend to die to protect our family from people who were trying to hurt us. What people? Myra frowned. My family. Your grandparents and aunts and uncles. They were planning to take you away from your mother and steal the money I wanted you to have. Layla looked confused. But they're family. Andrew nodded. They're related to us by blood, but they're not family in the ways that matter. Family doesn't try to hurt each other. Family doesn't lie to each other. Family doesn't try to steal from each other. Sharon joined them, kneeling down so all 4 of them were at the same level. Girls, your father made an incredibly difficult choice to protect us. He knew that the only way to stop your grandparents from destroying our family was to let them think they'd won, so they would show everyone their true nature. Myra looked at her mother. So this morning, when you said you were moving to Philadelphia. I was never going to Philadelphia, Sharon said firmly. I was following your father's plan to expose the people who were trying to separate us. Andrew reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 small boxes. I have something for both of you. Layla and Myra opened the boxes to find matching necklaces with delicate heart pendants. These necklaces have GPS tracking and emergency communication, Andrew explained. I never want either of you to feel unsafe or uncertain about where your family is ever again. Myra was examining her necklace when she looked up at her father. Dad, are we going to see Grandma Judith and Grandpa Sylvester anymore? Andrew's expression became serious. No, sweetheart. We're not. They've shown us that they don't respect our family or care about our happiness. We're going to build our life around people who love and support us. Layla nodded slowly. Good. They were never nice to Mom anyway. Andrew looked at Sharon with surprise. You noticed that? We both noticed, Myra said. They always talked to Mom like she was stupid or didn't belong. We hated it. Sharon felt tears in her eyes. Her daughters had seen the cruelty she'd thought she was hiding from them. Andrew stood up and helped Sharon to her feet. Come on, let's go home. We have a lot to talk about, and I have 8 years of family dinners to make up for. As they drove home in Sharon's car, Andrew in the passenger seat, both girls in the back, Sharon felt like she was living in a dream. 3 hours ago, she'd been a widow fighting to protect her children's inheritance. Now she was driving home with her husband and daughters, planning their future together. Andrew, she said quietly, what happens tomorrow when your family realizes you're alive? Andrew smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. Tomorrow they're going to discover that the son they thought they could manipulate is very much alive, very much in control, and very much done tolerating their behavior. Are you going to see them? We're going to see them. All of us together. They're going to learn that when you try to destroy someone's family, You lose the right to be considered family yourself. Myra leaned forward from the back seat. Dad, are you really okay? Like medically okay? Andrew turned to look at his daughter. I'm fine, Myra. The cancer treatment worked exactly as it was supposed to. I'm healthy and I'm here to stay. Layla spoke up. Dad, promise us you'll never pretend to die again. Andrew's voice was serious when he replied. I promise I will never put you through that again. From now on, we face everything together as a family. As they pulled into their driveway, Sharon noticed that the Lockhart family cars were parked across the street. Judith, Sylvester, Rebecca, and Marcus were all standing on the sidewalk, looking shell-shocked and furious. They know, Sharon said quietly. Andrew smiled. Good. Let's go show them what a real family looks like. What happened next was the most satisfying 15 minutes of Sharon's life. Andrew got out of the car first, followed by Sharon and the girls. The look on Judith's face when she saw her supposedly dead son walking toward her was worth every moment of pain Sharon had endured over the past few weeks. Hello, Mother, Andrew said calmly. Judith's voice was barely a whisper. Andrew, but you died. We buried you. You buried an empty coffin, Andrew corrected. I've been alive this entire time, watching you try to destroy my wife and steal my children's inheritance. Sylvester stepped forward, his face red with anger. What the hell is going on here? This is some kind of fraud. Some kind of what, Dad? Some kind of justice? Andrew's voice was cold. You manipulated legal documents to steal from my wife. You tried to separate my children from their mother. You celebrated what you thought was my death because it finally gave you power over people you've spent 8 years trying to control. Rebecca found her voice. Andrew, we can explain. Explain what? Explain how you planned to have Sharon committed to a psychiatric facility? Explain how you were going to claim she was an unfit mother? Explain how you were celebrating getting rid of the woman I love most in the world. Andrew pulled out his phone and played a recording. Judith's voice filled the air. Thank goodness. I never understood what Andrew saw in her. All those years of pretending to welcome someone so obviously beneath our standards. At least we don't have to keep up that charade anymore. The family stood in stunned silence as more recordings played. Their cruel comments about Sharon, their plans to control the girls' futures, their celebrations of what they thought was their final victory over the woman they'd never wanted in their family. When the recordings ended, Andrew put his phone away and looked at each family member individually. You are no longer welcome in our lives, he said simply. You will have no contact with my wife or my children. You will not attend their graduations, their weddings, or any other family events. You have forfeited the right to be considered family. Judith was crying. Andrew, please. We're your parents. We love you. You love controlling me, Andrew corrected. You love the idea of a son who follows your rules and marries someone you approve of. You never loved me enough to accept the woman I chose or the life I built. Sylvester tried one last time. Son, we were just trying to protect the family assets. Protect the girl's inheritance. Andrew's laugh was harsh. Dad, you were trying to steal the family assets. The girl's inheritance is safe with their mother, where it belongs. Your inheritance, on the other hand. Andrew paused. Well, let's just say that attempting to defraud a family member has legal consequences. Marcus stepped forward. What do you mean? I mean that every business partner, every social organization, every charity board, and every legal authority in this city now has recordings of you manipulating legal documents and attempting to steal a widow's inheritance. Your reputations are finished. Your business relationships are over. Your social standing is destroyed. Andrew took Sharon's hand and looked at his family one last time. You spent 8 years making my wife feel unwelcome in her own family. You tried to turn my death into your opportunity to get rid of her permanently. You failed. He turned to walk toward the house, then paused. Oh, and Mother, that $300,000 you were so excited to divide among yourselves? You might want to save it for legal fees. Attempting to defraud an estate is a felony. Andrew, Sharon, Layla, and Myra walked into their house together, leaving Andrew's biological family standing on the sidewalk in ruins. As the door closed behind them, Sharon felt something she hadn't felt in 8 years. Complete safety. Complete belonging. Complete family. Andrew wrapped his arms around her from behind as she watched their daughters collapse onto the living room couch, exhausted by the emotional roller coaster of the day. Are you okay? He whispered in her ear. Sharon leaned back against his chest. I'm perfect. We're perfect. Andrew turned her around to face him. Sharon, I need you to know something. Everything I did, every plan I made, every risk I took, it was all to protect this. To protect you and our girls and the life we built together. Sharon reached up and touched his face. I know. And Andrew, I need you to know something too. What? Sharon smiled. I would have been fine without the money. I would have been fine fighting them alone. I would have been fine raising our girls and building a new life from nothing. But I'm not fine without you. I'm not complete without you. Andrew kissed her deeply, and Sharon felt 8 years of doubt and insecurity and fighting for acceptance melt away. She was home. She was loved. She was family. Later that evening, after they had ordered pizza and talked for hours about everything that had happened, Sharon and Andrew sat on their back porch while Layla and Myra played basketball in the driveway. What happens now? Sharon asked. Andrew took her hand. Now we live the life we always should have lived. We raise our girls without interference from people who don't deserve to know them. We travel wherever we want, whenever we want. We support causes we believe in. We build something beautiful with the resources we have. Sharon squeezed his hand. And your family? They're not my family anymore. You are. The girls are. Anyone else who earns that place through love and respect and loyalty. Andrew paused. Sharon, I'm sorry it took me so long to understand that family isn't about blood or tradition or social expectations. Family is about choice, and I choose you every day for the rest of my life. Sharon felt tears in her eyes, but they were happy tears. I choose you too. As they sat together watching their daughters play in the driveway, Sharon realized that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating your enemies, but from discovering that you don't need their approval to live a beautiful life. Andrew had given her something more valuable than $10 million. He'd given her the knowledge that she was worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth choosing every single day. And that was worth everything. 3 months later, Sharon stood in the renovated office of Lockhart Enterprises, now officially renamed Lockhart Richardson Holdings. The company had been restructured, the toxic board members removed, and new leadership installed that valued integrity over social status. Andrew worked alongside her now, both of them building something better than what his family had created. They'd established scholarship funds for nursing students from working-class backgrounds. They'd created community health initiatives in underserved neighborhoods. They'd proven that wealth could be used to build up rather than exclude. Layla and Myra thrived in their new reality. Therapy had helped them process the trauma of believing they'd lost their father, and they were stronger for having survived it. They understood now that family was something you chose, not something you were born into. The Lockhart family had indeed been destroyed, just as Andrew predicted. Sylvester's business relationships evaporated when the recordings went public. Judith was removed from every charity board she'd served on. Rebecca and Marcus found themselves unwelcome in the social circles they'd once dominated. The legal consequences were still pending, but the social consequences were complete. They'd been exposed for exactly who they were, and no amount of money could repair the damage to their reputations. Sharon's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Just saw the article in the Business Journal about the new community health center. Your father and I are so proud of you, baby girl. You've built something amazing. Sharon smiled. Her parents had been her rock through everything, never once saying I told you so about Andrew's family, just offering love and support and the reminder that real family showed up when it mattered. Andrew appeared in her office doorway. Ready to go home? The girls have their recital tonight. Sharon gathered her things, looking around the office that now represented not just wealth, but purpose. She'd gone from being called an outsider and a gold digger to running a $43 million empire. But more importantly, she'd gone from fighting for acceptance to understanding that she'd never needed it in the first place. As they walked to the elevator, Andrew put his arm around her waist. You know what I was thinking? What? We should take the girls to Paris this summer. Just the 4 of us. No schedules, no obligations, just family time. Sharon leaned into him. That sounds perfect. In the elevator, Sharon caught their reflection in the polished doors. A black woman and a white man, building a life that defied the people who said they didn't belong together. 2 daughters who would grow up knowing that love wasn't about meeting someone else's standards. It was about choosing each other every single day. I love you, Sharon said. Andrew kissed the top of her head. I love you more. Not possible. As they stepped out into the warm evening air, Sharon thought about the woman she'd been 8 years ago. The nursing student who'd believed that love could conquer anything. She'd been right, but not in the way she'd imagined. Love had conquered, not by changing the people who rejected her, but by revealing that their rejection said everything about them and nothing about her worth. Thank you for following this incredible journey of love, betrayal, justice, and family. Sharon Lockhart learned that sometimes the people who try to destroy you end up giving you exactly what you need to build something even stronger. True family isn't about blood. It's about choice, loyalty, and unconditional love. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to remember their own worth. Have you ever had to stand up to people who underestimated you? Let us know in the comments below.